Hi, good morning, and welcome to the British Channel Island of Jersey, which I've just been here for a few hours. Came in last night and here for a day today. It's absolutely nice. Sun's just poking through, and I've come down to the marina just behind me, so a good spot to have a look around yourself. And just joining me as one of the main links to the island is just docking over there. If you can see the big Stena Line ferry, which has made its way over from Southampton, more than likely, bringing goods, cars, people visiting the island. It's an absolutely lovely place to come here for a summer trip, long weekend or a week. Plenty of things to do. Out to my right hand side over there is beautiful big St Helier Bay, some lovely housing on the back there, and the town just across the back of my shoulder, which we can't see behind this new development in the marina itself. But interestingly, just this is the best bit of it. Right behind me there on the island, you can see is the Elizabeth Castle, a Tudor castle built here uh, hundreds of years ago. Home at once to King Charles II, took refuge here during the English Civil War. Uh, this is back in the day, previously when Sir Walter Raleigh was also the governor of Jersey. Steeped in history, beautiful island to visit. I am yet to do it because you can walk over here on a pathway which is covered by the tide, and so every time I come here, it's actually the tide's in. You can't get there. You can get there by little ferry as well, but not managed to time that right either. But really looking forward to getting over to the Elizabeth Castle sometime soon. But I thought, what a great place to stand and read to you the chapter 11 of the Sanctuary as we're getting through this book now. Ben's making lots of progress, having a tour around the Sanctuary Rock and the Hex, getting Bianca showing him all the various places, getting a little bit more information about Pemberley and what's going on there. Quite interesting. So let's continue with Ben's tour of the Rock Sanctuary. Chapter 11. Back at the hospital, Bianca escorted me to my room and told me to make my way to the hub for dinner in an hour. I sat on the bed for a while, trying to move my hand beneath the bandages, and then set off. The medical hex had 4 tarmac paths leading off it, signposted with the destinations they led to and how long the journey would take, either walking or by cart. Darkness had fallen, and the way was lit by elegant curved lamps. The paths glowed with the same blue light as the harbour tunnel, as though they had sucked up the sun's rays during the day and were emitting them now. I decided to walk. Every so often a cart appeared behind me. The drivers saluted as they passed, and 1 or 2 offered me a lift, but I declined. I needed time to think. I had come here to get Kara back, but Kara had left without telling me, without any indication. The last I had heard from her, she was happy here and not coming home. Why would she have gone? She couldn't have taken another position voluntarily. I remembered a phrase from one of her letters. It's paradise, darling. But she hadn't known I was coming. My timing was wrong, that was all. I would have to find her, wherever she was, perhaps on Pemberley's mainland estate. When she saw me, she would remember her love for me, and we would return to the city, to life as it was before all this. The great hall's lights radiated out across the hub, and hundreds of people were arriving, streaming in through the doors. White-clad assistants moving the emptying carts out of sight. I explained myself to a helper at a lectern outside the hall, who said she would find me a place right away. She consulted a list, left for a minute, and then returned to shepherd me inside. The room was full of long benches, stretching out either side of a central dais, and the benches were full of men and women, all dressed more or less like me, plus dozens of children running between tables or sitting on their parents' laps. They were not a diverse group, every ethnicity, every shape and size, but not every age. The very oldest people I could see looked to be in their late 30s. On the central dais was a round table, laid for a formal dinner, and as I followed the guide, I realized with horror that she was leading me there. 2 of the seats were already occupied. A young couple looked up at me briefly, then returned to an anxious conversation in low voices. Each seat had a place card. One read simply Bianca, as though she was the only woman with her name on the island. Elsewhere, Angela Knight was sitting before a short, muscular man a few years my junior, Alan Munro. There were 2 more names around the table. The first was Ben Parr, scratched into copperplate on a perfect square of card. It looked intended somehow, as if I'd always been going to end up here. Next to it, the final card simply read, John. I was going to be beside Pemberley himself. Ben, I started, and turned to see Bianca. You ready? Of course. Don't be intimidated by him. He's very bored of meeting people who quiver as they shake his hand. That's why I've placed you beside him. I meet important people often enough. I'm sure I'll cope. I wasn't sure of it at all. The benches on either side of the central dais were full now. Suddenly a ripple of silence stretched across the room, broken only by the scrape of benches as people stood. A procession was moving towards us, raising a buzz of conversation in its wake. A voice at the front was saying something. Sit down, that's enough of this. With that, Sir John Pemberley was at the table. He turned to one side to speak to an attendant, and I had a few seconds to observe him. I should have enjoyed them more, the last moments of my life, free of his personality. I had somehow divined from Cara's letters that he could be physically broad, that he would have spent his free time exercising, like a lot of other plutocrats. I had even correctly predicted a shaved head, polished and gleaming under the lights of the hall, but his muscles did not look gym-built. His whole bullish frame had a kind of practicality about it, matched by the clothes he wore, a plain white shirt and trousers of dark blue. Despite his bulk, there was a sense of energy about him. He was fast without being agitated, present without being frantic. He seemed to pick up on everything about him without losing focus on whoever he was listening to. He was balletic in a way. He moved to his seat and slid sideways into it. So, who do we have tonight? He looked around him, to his right at first, greeting the people sitting there. Knight and the old man Munro, then the young couple, I guessed were the ordinary residents of the island attending as a privilege. They looked like they were about to faint. Bianca was on the other side of them, then me. Pemberley's eyes settled on me as we sat down. Who's this? Bianca answered him. This is Ben. He frowned, and Knight spoke to help him remember. The intruder. Why is he at my table? He looked at Bianca, and she stumbled over her answer. Eventually she managed to speak. I arranged it, John. And why the hell would you do that? He explained to me why he's here. It's a funny story, really. Is it now? Yes, Father, it is. Perhaps he could tell us himself. He turned his attention to me, and his eyes were very calm. I don't know how funny it is, Mr. Pemberley. I certainly wasn't to call him Sir John. I was going to see Cara Sharp. Obviously, I didn't quite arrive as planned. I'm very sorry for causing so much difficulty. He kept his eyes on me. He came all this way to see our Cara. Our Cara? Yes, we're engaged. He blinked. It was meant to be a surprise. Certainly has been. He kept his eyes on me and nodded slowly. Quite intrepid. Quite stupid. That was Knight on his other side. Well, anyway, Ben, she's not available. Yes, Bianca informed me of that already. So why are you still here? Well, I believe my departure is being arranged, although I'm not sure. Fine. He nodded, and I left my thoughts unvoiced. I'll find her and take her from you when I go. He gestured at my bandaged hand. Need your food cut up for you? I'll manage. Well, as we have you for a meal, you may as well know who's here. On my right here, Alan Munro, head of security. He's the one who would have stopped you getting in. Munro simply jerked his eyebrows as if to show me how little he thought of my presence at the table. Angela Knight, geneticist and ecologist, also management genius, has run bloody everything here since the year dot. We've met, Knight smiled, with half her mouth. Here we have, and he paused almost imperceptibly, retrieving the names of the other two guests, Francis and Joanna, who work in food, and a baby on the way too, yes? They nodded, bashful but delighted by his attention. Joanna's hands moved to her proud stomach, almost instinctively. You've met Bianca already, and I'm John. A steward was at his elbow. They're ready for you. Pemberley nodded and looked back at me. Don't do anything else stupid for the next few minutes. He left his seat and crossed the dais towards a slender wooden podium that overlooked the whole hall, left and right. I sat back. My cheeks were hot. His delivery had been fast, confident. Almost everything he'd said had left me stumbling along after him. But on my other side, Bianca gave me a little smile, conspiratorial. Perhaps I hadn't done as badly as I thought. The room had fallen quiet now. Pemberley was at the podium, and I swiveled in my seat. All right, everyone. Not much from me tonight. Just a few quick thanks to some people who've gone above and beyond. Donald Matcham from Sanitary, who has been doing some heroic things in the septic tanks. Extra showers for Donald, please. A laugh. All of you working in food because you've just got our 5th harvest of the year in. Tonight's meal was 98% produced here in the fields and tunnels. Everything but the saffron. Applause at that. And lastly, Samantha and her gang in the engineering hex. Sam informs me the turbines are working again thanks to their efforts, meaning we won't die of cold when winter comes. He nodded at the half-ironic cheers from around the room and grinned. He was charming under those lights. Unrecognisable from the thug who had sat beside me. So enjoy tomorrow. We're building it. At that, the entire room responded, echoing his final words. We're building it. He looked as though he was about to step down from the podium, and the conversation was starting to build again, but he leaned back towards the microphone. The room fell silent in a second. Just one more thing. I've told you all this before, but I want to remind you, however you came here, you chose to be here. He glanced towards us, but I could not tell from his hollow eyes if he was looking at me. And not only did you choose, you were chosen. Whatever the choice that brought you here, the fact that you are still here means you were chosen in return. Never forget it. He stepped down out of the discreet spotlight from above and into the shadow and crossed the room towards us once more as the buzz of conversation spread back through the hall. Plates were brought out from the kitchen. It wasn't luxurious food, a kind of vegetable broth with bread on the side, but it was delicious. So Ben, got another name? Par. Par as in average, 2 R's. Not a very average way to behave, coming here creating such a bloody fuss. As I said before, I'm sorry for the trouble I've caused. You're just lucky. I was walking the cliffs, spotted you just as you hit the rock. Bloody great bang you made. It was you who saw me. I glanced at Bianca for confirmation and she nodded. What had Knight told me? A daydreamer, she'd said. Thought you were the revenue. Revenue don't normally capsize their own boats though. Pembley laughed and I tried to join in, unsettled, picturing him witnessing my accident from the cliffs above, weighing up whether to intervene. Tell me about yourself. He ascertained my profession and parentage in what felt like a few seconds. I had the sense of being rifled through all of the most salient facts about me being noted for future reference. Age? 33, the same as Kara. Not very young. Still just about young enough, I'd say. For what? To leave a mark. He glanced at me, then returned to savaging his food. Siblings? None. Why not? I couldn't say. My mother had me very young. Perfect time to have more then. Something wrong between her and your father? I felt for a strange moment as though he was pulling me along over stony ground, territory uncertain to me, but which he already knew well. You'd have to ask her, but she's passed away now. They both have. He nodded. No condolences. Your education? A little school in the south, St. Christopher's. My first lie. Bianca's fork slipped and squeaked against her plate. I think I told it naturally enough, though, because he grunted and asked me about my training. I told him about Florence. You strike me as pretty serious about your work. You have to be if you want to make a living in it. There's hardly an infrastructure to support my kind of art anymore. What's your style? Portraits in oils. He nodded. Who do you paint? Quite a lot of people in the villages. Your ones, I mean. Obviously, how are they as subjects? Some are really interested. They understand it's a process of collaboration between the artist and the sitter to get some kind of, I paused, some kind of truthful representation, I suppose, if we're being pretentious. And the rest of it just have a bit of blank wall going spare and too much money on their hands. Sometimes, yes. What do they get out of it? Some of them just want to be looked at for a few hours, and they don't even care whether they get a painting at the end of it. You're their niche therapy. If you like. He was needling me, trying to find a way in, and I was determined not to give him one. But a few are looking for something a bit more permanent. Elixir of youth, if you like. I can understand the appeal. I'm sure you've been painted in your life. Me? He snorted. Don't even like being photographed. Wouldn't let someone look at me for a month or however long it takes. You should consider it. Why? Well, you clearly have an interest in legacy. You want this place to last. Exactly the place, not me. It doesn't need a picture of me hanging around like Dorian Bloody Grey. No, that's not the way to immortality. I don't think there's any way to that. Then why bother painting anyone at all? He had asked so casually about the core of my life's work that it took me a few seconds to reply. Like I said, it's a way of capturing the reality of a human life. I spoke slowly, feeling my way. There are so many different versions of ourselves, possibly in our muscles, but when I've done my work, well, most temporary versions are stripped away and you see a little of the subject's inner life. I thought there was no art to find a man's construction in the face. You can't tell what someone's planning, but you can tell what they are. Sounds mystical. Slightly. Talking about my work had always felt like taking off a layer of skin, and Pemberley was better at creating the feeling than most. I changed the subject. Do all people here come from the villages? Pemberley glanced at Angela Knight, and she gave me a patronising and confidential smile, as if I had said something impossibly stupid. We pride ourselves on taking people not from the villages, for the most part, she said. The only people who have spent much time there were in the service hubs. We want talented people from the whole spectrum of life. Pemberley cut across her. Joanna, Francis. The young couple had been watching us like rabbits, and they snapped to attention now. Mind telling Ben how you came to be here? The pair told what I felt was a slightly sanitized version of their life before coming to the island. Joanna had been in a service kitchen, working across several villages, and Francis had been an arable farmer. They had been allocated to the same cottage on their arrival, as all the cottages on the island had 2 rooms, but were now living together in one half of it. Pemberley waved his fork. You see, people who have the skills to work in the villages but can't afford a place there, that's who you'll find here. You speak as though you like them more than the people who you've made rich. He shrugged. Villages are fine, but you'd have to be stupid not to see that the Francises and Joannas of this world are worth more. They looked like they could float from their seats with happiness. Empty plates were taken away, fresh ones brought. So what do you think of it? Of the place? He rolled his eyes. No, the stew. Of course the place. I don't quite understand the purpose of it. It feels like a world in parallel, and I don't understand the need to be all the way out here. Pemberley sighed. I'm sure you've read the literature, Ben. It's an attempt to create serious, useful technologies for the future while simultaneously leaving us a lighter footprint as possible on your bloody planet. We have small, versatile factories to help us produce the basics of life. We can combine those basics to make really quite complicated things with relatively few of us, and we have sufficient stores to provide anything else that might become necessary. I see. And as far as the need goes to be out here goes, I would say we are working on the model for another kind of life too. One lived in the natural world. People in the villages get to live a better life, and I'd like people in the cities to experience that too. I want to bring everyone with us. Unreasonable? Not at all. But you haven't brought many people with you. To be honest, it feels to me like a larger version of a prepper place. He put his fork down quite carefully, and I felt a sharp nudge in my leg from Bianca's side. Don't quite agree with you there, Pa. Perhaps the wine on the table had gone to my head. But whatever the cause, here I was, challenging Pemberley on his own terms at his own table, and I felt confident in it. I don't see the difference. The preppers store things for themselves. You just said you keep stores here. They think the world might end. I'm sure the thought has occurred to you. The end of the world. He ran his tongue round the inside of his mouth. Funny phrase. Mostly people use it to mean a world without humans in it. So revealing. For most animals, what we think of as at the end of the world would be a hitherto unimagined liberation. From being kept in a box, bludgeoned for your meat, having your habitat destroyed around you so some fool 6,000 miles away can change his dining table, and we somehow define that as catastrophic. That's as maybe, but the preppers are doing the same as you. You're just operating on a bigger scale. There is a significant difference. Pemberley spoke softly. The prepper is retreating. This place is an advance. You see the difference? I shrugged, but he continued. The prepper hopes, pathetically, that if you store up enough supplies, you'll be able to just pick up your old life. Nobody has created anything like this place before. Nobody. You remember the people who ran to New Zealand during the last panic? Half of them died. One of them forgot the codes, locked himself out of his own fridge, and starved 6 floors underground. His cheeks had gained colour, and he took a drink of wine. Even so, you can see that he cut me off. No, Pa, I don't see anything of the sort. There are men like me preparing their estates for the end of the world. They are preparing nothing but their own tombs. What have they thought of? A concrete bunker in some mountainside, living on tinned food, and then, after 20 years, you step out to do what? Try to farm for the first time in your life? Repopulate the earth with your harem? Pathetic. Real wealth does not do that. Real wealth tills and grows and gardens right now. He looked around the table, which had grown quiet, and moderated his voice. Real wealth works with others to produce something greater than any bunker. That makes sense, doesn't it? It does, yes. Good, because what you just said to me is an insult. I felt a prickle of unease and was glad for the first time that Kara was not here to witness this conversation. I didn't mean to. Forget it. Your first night here. He turned to speak to Monroe on his other side. The rest of the conversations around the table resumed, hurriedly, as if to conceal the fact that everyone else had been listening to Pemberley's speech. I looked around me and, alone, suddenly, Pemberley was engrossed with Monroe and Angela Knight. I was caught between mortification at how clumsily and needlessly I had offended him, and anger at his casual disrespect. Bianca avoided my gaze. The long benches along the room cleared one by one, and eventually Pemberley stood. All right, that's enough for one night. Our party trailed through the hall behind him as the table servants cleared the long benches. He moved past them, exchanging a joke or a comment here or there, and before long our group stood on the short flight of steps from the hall to the ground. All right, we're all accounted for. Good night, Monroe, Francis, Joanna, such a pleasure. Look after that baby now. And young Mr. Average, he turned to me. Where are you staying? I'm not sure. Well, Joanna, Francis, is there a spare room in your place? If you were originally allocated the cottages as singles? They nodded with urgency. Anything to help Sir John. All right, well, there you have it. You stay with these two tonight. Your things will be brought from the hospital. I don't want to cause any trouble. Bit late for that. I was still alarmed by the tension at dinner, and hoped I could improve matters with a few private words. I angled my body towards Pemberley, and he noticed and drew me back for a second. Angela Knight, on his other side, scowled. I really didn't intend to offend you earlier. About what? He was baiting me into apologizing more explicitly. I reminded myself I was here to see Kara, not to sabotage her career. About the prepper idea, I clearly misunderstood the purpose of this place. I'm sorry. Quite all right. Easy for false impressions to build up. Better to lance it now. Those people are my least favourite, you see. His tone was calmer, and I felt confident. By the way, I didn't say before, but this building is beautiful. I was minded to tell him I knew it, but Bianca was standing opposite us, and I remembered her frozen, horrified look when I had suggested mentioning Hillcrest to her father. Pemberley looked at me. You like it? I do. Is it based on anywhere? My own invention. There was a lie, and one I couldn't challenge him over. The mural at the end of the room is very striking. The story of Fasticulan from the Book of Exeter. I don't know that one. He looked towards the hall as he answered, and shadows filled the sockets of his eyes. A great beast lies in the sea, looking like a spit of land covered in weeds. Sailors moor their ships to him and think themselves safe and start a fire, and then he dives into the abyss, taking everyone with him, and swallows them at his leisure. Not a very encouraging message for your residents. On the contrary, it's something inevitable. It's like falling in love. No matter how something turns out, you must keep following the path you're on, into the abyss. You did that coming here. I suppose so. He turned back towards me. Kara didn't know you were coming, did she? No, I feel pretty stupid now. Bianca said she's at the mainland estate. Is that right? Where else would you imagine? I haven't sacked her, if that's what you're asking. I felt great relief at that, and he continued. She'll be back before long. Why don't you take a couple of days here? Get that hand better, and then she'll be back, and you can decide what to do together. If I had been asked earlier that day, I would have declined. I would have demanded to be taken straight to the mainland, to wherever Kara was, but never mind my hand, never mind anything. But there was truth in what he said. By the time she got back here, I would be recovered. I might even have formed some kind of connection with Pemberley, the man she admired most in the world, and I could use it again to regain her approval. That's a very kind offer, I said. Then it settled. Welcome, and Angela was wrong. You know, saying it was stupid to come here? It takes courage to do something like that. He glanced towards the rest of the company. Good night all. Angela, Monroe, usual times tomorrow? Then he turned and strode away, round towards the back of the hall, and was lost in the darkness. So that's chapter 11. Chapter 12 comes next, and I'll find a nice place to read that perhaps a little bit later today. Have a nice day. Bye now.